Raise some
Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Raising Cain show. And tonight, our guest knows all too well what it means to fight for justice in the face of political compromise. Joe Conner is the son of Frank Conner, who was tragically murdered in the 1975 bombing of New York City's historic Fraunces Tavern by the FALN, a Puerto Rican Marxist terrorist group. But what makes Joe's story even more compelling and infuriating is how this pursuit of justice was obstructed by the highest levels of government. And in fact, we have something in common because there are few people who have been touched by the Clinton corruption, and both of us have. And so for that, I'm very interested to hear a story tonight, and I think you guys will be too. In 1999, then President Bill Clinton granted clemency to 16 FALN members responsible for bombings that took innocent lives, including Joe's father. Since that moment, Joe has made it his mission to demand accountability and ensure that such political favors for terrorists do not go unchallenged. Joe's testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Foreign Relations and the Senate Judiciary Committee, advocating for victims' rights and the integrity of the justice system. He authored the books The New Founders and Shattered Lives, and produced a documentary chronicling FALN's reign of terror. Joe's also faced terrorists like Oscar Lopez Rivera and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in person, unwavering in his fight for justice. Today, Joe joins us to discuss his personal story, the controversial clemency decisions, and his ongoing pursuit of justice. Joe, thank you for joining the show tonight.
Oh, not at all, Nate. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So Joe, I kind of gave a quick synopsis, of what, what your background is, but
Right.
please go into talking about what happened in 1975, if you would, and give us a little bit of background, because a lot of the people that are listening, I was born in 1975, so
Yeah.
I'm not even all that familiar with FALN. I remember hearing about that, much later. It's some documents
Right.
that I was looking at, but if you would give people a little background of what was going on at the time.
Sure. I was 9 years old on January 24th, 1975, when my father was murdered. So it'll be 50 years ago next month, and my birthday was January 20th, and we're going to be celebrating it that night. My dad was a banker. He was 33 years old, brought up in New York City. And his mother was a cleaning lady at the Morgan Bank, which is now JP Morgan. She got him a job out of high school so he wouldn't be a cop or a fireman or work in the subway like his friends. Those were dangerous jobs. He was going to have a safe job. And so out of high school, he started working there, and he went to night school and married my mom. But on January 24th, I was 9, my brother was 11, and he went off to work that Friday morning like he did every day on the train. We lived in northern New Jersey. And he went out to lunch with clients to Fraunces. And Fraunces, for those who may know, is where George Washington paid farewell to his officers after the Revolutionary War. It's where the Sons of Liberty met. It's where Hamilton, that the play by Lin Miranda, was set. And I'll get into Miranda a little bit later. But my dad was having lunch with clients when the guy walked in who looked a lot out of place with sort of a backpack duffel bag type thing, and he set it down on the step in the inside of the restaurant and quickly moved. Within a couple of minutes, the pack detonated. It killed 4 people, 3 instantly. 1 died a few hours later at Beacon Hospital. Wounded 60 people. Sent shrapnel. I mean, the bomb was built with TNT and laced with the shrapnel, like nails and that kind of stuff. And that was the Vietnam era, and a lot of the EMT guys, and the firemen and cops, they were Vietnam vets, and a lot of them said they had never seen that kind of carnage, even in Vietnam. It was horrific. It was the first real major terror attack in New York City since the anarchists in 1920 blew up a horse-drawn cart. My dad showed me that when I was a kid because that was a building where he worked. But so he was 33 years old. His name was Frank Connor, and we found out that night that my father was murdered. And what that does to a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, and my mom, who was an immigrant from Ireland and had no family here, was devastating. Turns out the FALN was responsible for 130 bombs in the U.S. between 1974 and 1983. They blew up the Mobil Oil building on August 3rd, 1977, and killed a guy named Charlie Steinberg. And years later, I actually worked in that building. Decades later, I worked in that building too. So there's a lot of weird coincidences that went on. But the FALN they were a Marxist group. Their stated goal was for independence for Puerto Rico. But that really wasn't their goal. Their goal was to create a Cuban-style Marxist regime in Puerto Rico. They were hell-bent on killing, as they said, reactionary corporate executives. They left communiques at each of their bombings. It was like something out of a movie. And over the years, they were very, very difficult to track down. They were really well versed in the spy craft, and that came from Cuban intelligence. Trained them. Eventually, they were arrested in Chicago, outside of Chicago. They were going to be holding up an armored car. When they were caught, they were taken to prison. They wouldn't testify at their own trials because they said the U.S. didn't have jurisdiction over them. They were sentenced between 35 and 70 years. At sentencing, they threatened to kill the judge. His name was Tom McMillan, and he carried 2 6-shooters under his robe. They were bad guys. One of the FALN members, a guy by the name of William Morales, was not arrested in Chicago. But on July 12th, 1978, which would have been my dad's 37th birthday, he blew himself up in his Queens bomb factory when he was torquing a pipe bomb. He didn't clean it properly, and he got some dust caught in the treads. And when he torqued it, it exploded. It blew off 9 of his fingers, 1 of his eyes. And when the cops and firemen got there, he was trying to shred FALN documents. He turned on the gas in the apartment to blow it up. These guys were really dedicated to their cause. Morales was tried, convicted, sentenced to 89 years New York, 10 years federal, and then escaped from Bellevue Hospital a couple of years later, shimmying down a rope made of sheets, like something out of a movie. A guy with 1 finger. He was helped by his lawyer, and he ended up in Mexico, where he and an accomplice killed a Mexican federale. He was sentenced to prison in Mexico, and then in 1988 extradited to Cuba, where he's been a guest of the Cuban regime, along with Joanne Chesimard, who killed Warner Forster on the Jersey Turnpike in 1973, and a guy like Victor Garena, who was a armored car robber, Charlie Hill. There's about 70 fugitives in Cuba, and my getting them returned has been a major focus of the last 40 years of my life, or maybe 50 if you want to put it back to when I was 9. So that's kind of in a nutshell the FALN. They were the most prolific terror group in the history of the United States. The day they blew up the Mobile Oil building, they also threatened to blow up the World Trade Center, and the World Trade Center was actually evacuated that very day, the first time it was ever evacuated, and the other time was 9/11. I could talk about that. I was a 9/11 family member and witness. It was in the Trade Center then too. So there's a lot, and I just kind of gave you a high-level
Wow.
version of it. Yeah, I didn't even get to the whole stuff yet. So
it's really interesting because, like I said, I didn't know a whole lot about FALN because it was, happened around the time I was born.
right.
But it reminds me very much of the Weather Underground, which
Yeah.
was another
Mhm.
Marxist group that was involved in bombings in the United States around the same time.
Yeah, absolutely
Um,
connected. All those groups were
mhm. Um,
intimately connected. Yep.
I was going to ask you about that. I had the sense that they probably, I'm sure they probably got support from the same people, down in Cuba.
They did.
The other thing too one of the things that came up in a show I just did a couple of days ago, I was doing research for the show in preparation, and I was having somebody on, Enrico Tario, the head of the Proud Boys, who's in jail for, I think he's like 24 years or something like that, and he was not even there on
Yeah,
January
I
6th.
listened to your podcast.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the charge that they charged the people who were there on January 6th with, that, has put these guys for essentially, walking around the Capitol building, protesting, and in some cases, maybe destruction of property, or throwing a fist at a cop. These guys got like 22, 20 to 30 years because they were charged with an enhancement called seditious conspiracy. Now, the interesting thing about seditious conspiracy was when I was looking that up to see when it was, last used, it was used against
The
uh, the,
FALN.
that's right, against the
Yeah.
FALN. They were charged with that. And so to think about what they did, they certainly deserved it. They absolutely 100% deserved. In fact, I can't believe that they didn't get the death penalty, for the Insurrection Act, as well.
Yeah,
Um,
it's yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, go ahead. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that, and
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny tonight. We, like I mentioned before, it'll be the 50th anniversary of the Fraunces bombing next month, and every year a group of us we go there on that day and have a couple of beers. We remember. It's family members, it's law enforcement, and it's people who just want to pay tribute. It's some 9/11 family
mhm,
members who I'm connected with, and it's really actually a pretty nice event. And this year we're going to do it again. And I was talking just before I got on here with Jeremy Margolis. He was the assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago who came up with the idea for a seditious conspiracy to charge the FAL. And it was the first time that had been used since the Civil War, from what I
that's
know.
right.
And Jeremy described it again today because we were writing a bit of writing about this, the two of us. And he's like, it described them perfectly. They were looking to use violence to change a political the political ends in the United States, and that was where seditious conspiracy had come from, and it had never been used, as you pointed out, and it fit the FALN perfectly. Now
Hmm.
you have to understand a couple of things. The FALN was arrested in Chicago, as I pointed out, aside from Morales and one other. Um, the bomb that killed my dad and Charlie Steinberg was in New York. So they weren't extradited to New York to face the Fraunces bombings. They were put away for like 70 years in Chicago. They're basically put away for life.
Hmm.
And the economics of law enforcement then and even now, where the death penalty was not in place for in the states of Illinois or New York, there was no reason to bring them back for extradition. So they were never specifically charged with my dad's murder. However, like say Osama bin Laden, who didn't fly the plane that crashed into the World Trade Center, they were members of the conspiracy. And as members of the conspiracy, you're responsible for all acts of that conspiracy. And that conspiracy included 130 bombs, and um, they threatened. Well, they took over Mondale's headquarters, Carter's headquarters. They threatened to. Um, they were planning to kidnap Ronald Reagan's son. They took over an armory for weapons in Milwaukee. They were filmed building bombs in a safe house in Chicago. And I went to Terre Haute, Indiana, to the federal prison and faced one of them, Oscar Lopez, and actually kept him in prison in 2011. They were really bad guys, Cuban trained, Cuban financed,
Hmm.
absolutely dedicated to their Marxist cause. And if anyone deserved, I mean, at trial, one of them said or at sentencing, sorry, one of them said, I think it was Carlos Torres, said to Judge McMillan, I'm George Washington. And McMillan, and apparently the way he would handle it, kind of leaned back and said, well, yes, you might be, but if the British had caught George Washington, they'd have hanged him. And that's what I would do to you if I could.
Hmm.
But that was not on the table because it wasn't the death penalty was not available to the judge at that point.
Wow.
Yeah, these are bad guys. I didn't. We'll get into the clemencies in a bit, I suppose, right?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
So, for you growing up in, I'm sure you remember vividly, that day that you found that
absolutely.
out. Um, how did that affect you growing up in your view of the world?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm. It was right after my birthday, right? So I just turned 9. Now I'm going to be, so you can do the math, right? I'm going to be 50. I'm going to be 59 in a month. Can't believe that, but it kind of divided my life before and after, and I've always sort of looked at my life that way. You know, uh, before my dad was killed, after my dad was killed, in two very distinct worlds. And I knew at the time, even at 9 years old, I kind of knew I needed to remember him, because that's all I would have. I mean, we have movies like silent movies that we, 8 millimeter, yeah, 8 millimeter movies that we had back then. We're fortunate to have them, but there's no sound, and so I always knew that I had to remember him, and I have. I've been actually fortunate that my memory, short term, isn't so great anymore, but I can remember my dad and a lot of like very very nice details about him, and and my brother and my grandmother, and my mom, we really stuck together, and I always felt like if we had failed as a family, that would have let the terrorists win, and it
Hmm.
also would have been a disservice to my father and his memory. So, not that we're the perfect people, but my brother and I went to college, and we have families of our own, and we have jobs, and basically stayed out of trouble. Um, and my mom's 86, and she's tough. Um, she's like, I said, Mom, we're gonna get this Morales back from Cuba one of these days. So she's still waiting for me to do it, and she's 86. She's good, great health, but how much time do we have? So anyway, we're working on that, and but it changed our lives, and it, all the things he missed, right? I mean, he missed his grandkids, and he missed his daughters-in-law, and my poor grandmother, that was her only son, her only child,
Oh,
and
wow.
she was devastated. Uh, she lived till right after 9/11. She was almost 98 when she died, and um, my cousin Steve Schlag was killed on 9/11. He was my dad's first cousin Don, um, his son Steve, and Don's mother and my grandmother came from Ireland. They were sisters. They came from Ireland together, and they went to Washington Heights in New York, and they lived right near each other. So Donald and my dad were like brothers. And then, first my dad is murdered, and then my dad's godson Steve was killed on 9/11, only blocks from Fraunces, and right after I went through the Trade Center. Actually, I started writing my book the night before 9/11 about my dad, and so obviously the book changed after that.
Sure.
Yeah, it was. So we've been through a lot, and we fought back as a family. My cousin Jean, Steve's sister, and I went to Gitmo together. And you don't go to Cuba with your female cousin too often, but we did. We went and we faced Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Natasha and the other high value detainees in the courtroom. So this has
Wow.
taken us on a very very odd journey, but it's all been to really give my father some justice. We're still working at it.
So let's fast forward a little bit to 1999.
Sure.
So at the time, Bill Clinton was president, and he
Yep.
decides to grant clemency to several FALN terrorists.
That's right.
What went through your mind when you heard that news?
Yeah. Well, to give a little background to it, about a year before that, we started hearing there were some rumors about it, and I actually talked to a reporter from the Houston Chronicles. He was Tony Fremantle, I think, and he'd written about he had met Oscar Lopez in prison or something, and he was like he came to New York and he met my brother and me at the World Trade Center, the bar under the Trade Center, ironically, and so we heard there were rumors that it might happen, but so we were a little prepared, but we started like, yeah, it's not going to happen. He's not going to do that. You know, we heard the terrorists didn't even request it. So what happened was Clinton got this notion that Hillary needed help being connected with the Latino community in New York when she was going to be running for senator from New York. Now you have to remember she expected to be running against Giuliani, but Giuliani
Right.
got sick and dropped out of the race. So, but when the clemencies were designed, and they were designed by Clinton and some of his inner circle, they charged Eric Holder with getting some cover for Clinton, and so Clinton went or Holder went to Margaret Love, who was a pardon attorney, and the the idea was that they wanted Love to kind of give them a memo that would recommend their release. See, the clemency of pardons is an unrestricted power of the president. In the Constitution, there's no restriction. Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist 74 that no president would abuse it lest he be thought a conniver. And as my brother pointed out back then, Clinton or Hamilton never never envisioned Clinton, or
Yeah.
now probably Biden and Obama too. But in '99, it was August. I was on vacation. I was at the zoo with my two kids and my brother's kids, and we came home from the zoo. It was a nice August afternoon. And my sister-in-law calls and said, "Oh, he did it. He released a terrorist." What? And I thought that they were out already, but no, they refused it. They said no. We're not accepting it because there are conditions, and the conditions were that they had to renounce violence and they couldn't associate with other felons. And of course, they're each felons, so they couldn't associate with each other. So they were given 30 days to have conference calls between prisons by Eric Holder and the Justice Department. You have to understand that clemency is a individual grant. It's not a group grant, so they never should have been given that ability to speak to each other. But after 30 days, and we wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal. We went on like Watch It with Laura Ingram's show back then, and some other shows. And it started becoming an issue. The Senate and the House both voted overwhelmingly to condemn Clinton for this. It was non-binding, but they voted overwhelmingly on both Democrat and Republican. And but when the pressure started mounting, Hillary and Bill said, "Well, we're going to pull the pardons." And then on September 10th, 1999, the FALN accepted the clemencies, with the exception of Oscar Lopez, and they walked out of prison. It was either September 9th or 10th or 11th. So exactly 2 years before 9/11 that they actually walked out of prison. I can't remember which date it was, but it was right around there. But Oscar Lopez stayed in, and we didn't know why. We found out a couple of years, well, but 12 years later when it was parole hearing and kept him in. But this was a calculated abuse of power or misuse of power by the President of the United States to release unrepentant murderers on the
Hmm.
American people to help Hillary's get elected. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Um, and as I said when I testified at Eric Holder's confirmation hearing, anyone that would do that would do anything. You know,
Yep.
release murderers. And it's funny, you were talking about before we got on about your experience with the Clintons, and in '99 when like I said, they took 30 days to accept the clemency, and the House and the Senate were having hearings about it. So I was asked to speak, and I did. And like I think I spoke the day after they walked out of jail. So it was like September 10th, 1999. So I'm in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I give my description of how horrified I was of what they had done to our family and that. So afterwards, I'm talking to a couple of FBI agents, these retired guys, and I said, Jesus Christ, should I be nervous? And they're like, nervous about what? I said, I've been trying to keep terrorists in prison, and now they're out. Should I be nervous about my family? And they're like, no, I wouldn't be nervous about the terrorists. I'd be nervous about the Clintons.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a joke. Like it wasn't like, and they all burst out laughing. It was, yeah. So to your point before, I park at a train. I would look under my car when I got off the train for a while, and I don't know. There was a lot of bad stuff, and these agents were, you know, so that was the experience, and it was terrible. And the truth is that since 1990, I had been writing letters to the Justice Department, to Bill Clinton, about William Morales being in Cuba and getting him extradited. So they knew I was out there. I have return letters from them. They classified them as terrorists in the letters. They weren't any, there was no ifs, ands, or buts who these people were, and they knew that families were out there, and it was a violation of the Victims' Rights and Restitutions Act that they didn't contact my family or any of the other victims' families before they released them. It was a horror show,
Mm.
but it showed that these people would literally release murderers to help their vote, and I was
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't know that it gets worse than that.
Yeah. I don't know either.
Then we saw.
This is.
I'm sorry.
It's bad enough that in politics that people pander. You see it all the time. But to
Yeah.
release unrepentant terrorists
Right.
in order to win some votes from Puerto Ricans in New York,
Yeah,
I mean, that's really what it was about.
it's sick.
And it wasn't just the Clintons. Like obviously Clintons are the ones that are held responsible for their decisions. But you had people like President Jimmy Carter and South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu that were also supporting clemency. I mean, these people are despicable.
But just it's really interesting that you raise that. Deanie Berger, whose husband was killed with my dad, she met Tutu. He came to Philadelphia and she met him and she asked him about this, and he said he had no idea.
Really?
Similarly, John O'Connor, the cardinal, they claimed that he was in favor of it too. And I have a letter. I wrote a letter to him, and I have a reply from him saying, "I never did that. I never asked for clemency." He said, "I always would say everyone's case should be reviewed, but I never recommended clemency." So it was pure lies.
So
And
that
that's
also
what
is
was going
par
on.
for the course for the Clintons.
Yes. Yeah.
Propaganda and lies.
And this isn't the only time they did this. Around the same time when she was running, there's a group of Hasids in New Square, New York, and they voted like 98% for her, and they got investigated by the FBI, and there was a quid pro quo. It was Bill gave clemency to a couple of these swindlers who were part of the community there in exchange for their votes. The FBI investigated it, and you know who exonerated Hillary? James Comey.
Of course.
Of course.
Of course.
He's been a Clinton hack for 25 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, you
so
know,
this stuff keeps going on and on and on, and that's why I'm yelling,
Yeah.
screaming, because it's nothing. Nothing here is new. They keep doing the same crap over and over again, and people, they just think people are going to forget it. Like I said, my long-term memory is pretty good. I'm
Yeah.
not forgetting.
Wow. So there's the FBI, I think, has always had problems, but it certainly has gotten worse, over the last, decade. I mean, it's just, I was working at the Bureau, and I've never seen a more politicized environment. And, which is sad, because I've talked to a lot of guys that are, old timers that retired from the FBI, and they're ashamed of what it's become.
They are. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, you talk to a lot of these guys. What are their thoughts on it?
Oh, that's my absolute experience. I mean, I've gotten to know, I think it's kind of unusual, which I didn't realize, that for the FBI agents to become friends with some of the victims' families. And I'm very tight with a couple of these guys. They've been retired a long time now, but like a guy named Rick Hahn, he was the case agent, or Jeremy Margolis, who was the U.S. attorney, Don Woodford, Ken Maxwell. They're all, I can't believe what has happened to the Bureau. They look, this is the other part of it that really needs to be brought out, and is that the families were betrayed by the Clintons, but the FBI agents were too. The law enforcement, these guys gave their lives. Some of them died, but they were blown up by these killers. But in another sense, they dedicated every minute they had to this. This is their life. Their marriages broke up. They were never home.
Right.
And then they were betrayed. Oh, these terrorists never killed anyone. These were nice terrorists. They should be released. And that's the kind of crap that they were peddling. That's why the Puerto Rican people who I've spoken to were horrified to think, they'll come to me. I don't support that. I'm like, I know, because you were lied to. And the younger people who didn't remember any of this were lied to. These weren't killers. Oh no, they were the nice terrorists. So if not for blowing up bombs, then what did they do to help Puerto Rico? There's no answer to that. But these agents really gave it their all, and they were absolutely betrayed. And it's really, it hurts. I mean, the bomb squad guys, NYPD, FBI, all of them. They were they're terrific people, and I'm really honored that I'm friends with them. And they'll come on January 24th, and we'll meet and salute each other and the victims.
Yeah. Yeah. So you obviously, I'm sure you've heard the news that Kash Patel is Trump's choice for the FBI. And one of the things I know he wants to do is he wants to investigate internally and clean up a lot of the corruption within the Bureau. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Yesterday, I testified at the House, and he walked past me in the hallway. I don't think he's saying, "Oh, I saw Joe," but I saw him. Anyway, I think he has to. I think what we have a bureaucracy, a politicized FBI. I mean, you remember as a kid, and you were an FBI agent. Everyone looked up to the FBI. It was
Oh yeah.
And now if you look at the
proudest moment of my
statistics,
career when I walked in there to get fingerprinted at the Bureau, that was the moment. That was the moment I knew I was in, and it was so exciting, and I had such a respect, for law enforcement, to know that I was going to be working for the premier law enforcement agency in the U.S.
in the world.
It was devastating to see how corrupt it was.
Yeah, and if you look at the numbers now, over the last 5 or 7 years, the approval rating, or the respect rating, I'm not sure how they phrase it, it's down in like, the 20s or something like that from people, where it used
Yeah.
to be, 60 or 70%. Like, so it has to be cleaned up. And I think if you're an agent there, you're begging for this. If you're a street agent
Yeah.
who's doing his best, you need it to be cleaned up, because I mean, I've worked in places where you have bad management, and it's terrible. So you really hope that by cleaning it up, Patel, and that he doesn't get stopped by these people in the swamp. But I
Hmm.
think he's going to have the backing of the American people. I think they all
I think
understand that
so
this is
too.
the time. This needs to be done.
Yeah. No, I agree. What I want to see happen, and I think this is what most Americans want, is that we want to see the FBI actually going after criminals,
Yeah.
the real bad guys like these FALN terrorists, guys like, these human traffickers that are, selling children into the sex trade, people who are producing, child porn. There was actually people, that were FBI whistleblowers. I've gotten to know several of them, and like Steve Friend, for example, who was pulled off of cases involving, a child pornography ring, that were producing child pornography, and they pulled them out of that case to go, basically after people, who were there on January 6th. It's just
Uh,
absolutely crazy.
yeah, I mean, like, you hear them. This was the largest investigation the FBI ever had. What?
Hmm.
Wait, what? I mean, you had 9/11. You had bombings in the 60s, and I mean, the
Yeah.
FALN was one bombing group, but like you mentioned before, the Weather Underground. There was the May 19th Communist Organization. There was the Black Liberation Army. There was all these groups, but January 6th was the largest investigation they ever had. That's insane.
Yeah. There's
It's
been
insane.
well over 1,000 Americans arrested already. It is
And,
really
and
a
you know
sad
how it
state of
makes
affairs.
you know how it makes me freaking mental when I hear, like, okay, well, these guys need to be charged with seditious conspiracy. They should be put away. And then I'm like, wait a second, time out. You guys had real terrorists in prison for
Yep.
70 years, and you released them for
Yeah.
politics. And now you're putting Americans in. And the other thing they never bring up is that in 1954, precursors of the FAL, another Puerto Rican group, shot up the Capitol building, shot 5 freaking congressmen.
Yep.
Um, and that never gets brought. But the worst day ever was the stupid riots on January 6th, which
Yeah.
I think we're going to find out from Cash Patel when he digs a little deeper, that they may not have been as organic as people act. Like, they might have been kind of
Yep.
pushed by some federal people, and that'll come. I hope that comes out. But
Yeah.
my God, look, I got to tell you, when I testified at Eric Holder's confirmation hearing, right? It was Patrick Leahy was leading. He's up on the dais, right? They're up there, the senators like Zeus and the gods on Olympus, right? And I'm this little peon that they're, you can see the video. It's on my website, but and they're so condescending, right? So they're looking at me like I'm some pathetic waif, and they're just so much better than everybody else, and that's really the aura that they have, right? So then I'm thinking, like, on September on January 9th or 6th, January 6th, they were a little afraid, and all of a sudden, the worst thing ever was not because of what was going to happen to the American people, because something might have happened to them, which is
Hmm.
way worse than anything happening to the American people. You see, my family could get wiped out. My father could get murdered. Just let the terrorists live. But if ever something happened to Pat Leahy or AOC or any of these clowns, that's the worst thing that ever happened. And that's what they give off. That's why it was so bad, because they were in jeopardy, or they really weren't, but they felt like they were. American people in jeopardy. Screw that. Um, so, but
Until
with
our
the Gitmo,
current,
they want to close it.
yeah.
They don't really care. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the up until this current attorney general, I would have said that Eric Holder was the most corrupt attorney general ever in American history, and I probably still is. Although I would say, the our current one and him are probably, in the running for it, but slightly different reasons.
Yeah.
Eric Holder, of course, one of the big cases scandals, I should say, that he was involved in was, Operation Fast and Furious,
Yep.
where basically they were smuggling guns
Guns.
to criminals in the cartels, and we had Border Patrol agents murdered with those very weapons.
Yes.
You
They
had
lost control of them. They didn't know what was going on.
that's right. That's right. Remember the new Black Panther Party case?
Yeah.
That was the one where he basically dropped all the charges of voter intimidation. They were standing
That's
out in
right.
front.
That was in Philadelphia, wasn't it?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
They were standing out in front of the voting, area, with clubs.
Yeah.
And we're gonna let that go.
I tell
You
you.
also
Sorry, go ahead.
he had a remember, he was the one that coined the claim or the quote, too big to jail, about the financial institutions, JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America, after the 2008 financial crisis. A lot of these guys were involved in multi-billion-dollar insider trading, selling off their shares. In fact, at the time, I'd stepped away from cybersecurity. That's been my background for 27 years, but I took a hiatus back in 2006 and started working in real estate and loans. And from 2006 to 2008, that's what I was doing. I was working at American Home Mortgage, who the CEO and president sold off all of his stock the day before they filed bankruptcy. And he did it from his yacht out in international waters.
Oh my God.
Of course, he got away with it. Nothing ever happened to him. Yet, people lost their homes. People lost their jobs. The economy, it was the worst hit our economy had seen, since the Great Depression. You had remember, one of the things about Holder that was unique to him was how he went after journalists. I think this guy. That's right, James Rosen. He went after the Associated Press, Fox News, claiming it was part of leak investigations, which was unheard of. But this guy, James Rosen, he tried to charge him as a criminal co-conspirator under the Espionage Act.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean,
James
I really,
guy, by the way, he's
yes.
awesome. Like,
I really believe Eric Holder is a communist. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. And funny thing about it is,
at Columbia University, he was. I mean, he was part of the group that shut down the university, and the Marxist groups and stuff. Yeah,
that's right. And it makes sense, because you think about it, right? Who was Obama hanging out with? Who were all his friends? A bunch of communists. So of course he puts Eric Holder. That's right, Bill Ayers. So he puts Eric Holder in charge of the Justice Department. And then replaces him. Who's he get replaced with? He gets replaced with James Comey
at the FBI.
Yeah. Sorry, at the FBI. So you have two communists. You have a communist at the who's basically running the DOJ, and you got James Comey, running the FBI, who had admitted to being a communist back when he was in college. So. It's crazy. These guys are a bunch of Marxists.
They are, and they were all in bed. When I testified at Holder's Senate confirmation hearing, there was three of us testified against him. And well, actually, no, I take that back. When the clemencies happened, Louis Freeh was running the FBI, and he was dead set against the clemencies, right? So he was very good. He was a good ally. Then 10 years later, whatever it was, in 2009, when Holder was going up for AG, when I testified against Holder, guess who was testifying for him? Louis Freeh. And all of a sudden, Louis Freeh's his boy. And it turns out they both work for the same law firm. I think is it the Coventry law firm?
Covington Burlington.
Burlington law firm. Yeah. So they become partners at the same law firm. And all of a sudden, Louis Freeh and Eric Holder are on the same page. I got a chance to confront Holder on all this stuff. It was pretty cool. Like I was at a work thing in DC, and it was really funny because there were like a couple different events going on and a couple of different speakers. One of the speakers was J.D. Vance, right? This is maybe 7 or 8 years ago. It was right after his book came out, so I got a chance to talk to him. He was pretty cool. And then Holder spoke. So when Holder was walking out, I was standing at the back, sort of saying, I want to confront him. So I went up to him and I reached my hand out. And I said, Mr. Holder. And he, oh yes, very nice to meet you. This BS. I said, I'd like to know, you released a terrorist that murdered my father. I'd like you to explain that, why you would do that, and I'd like you to know how that devastated our family and what it potentially done to American people. And he says, well, if I remember right, they were given longer sentences than the current guidelines. I said, well, that's not true. Even if it was, that wouldn't matter. But the Burton Commission report refuted that. That just wasn't true. And so then he's like, well, I'm really sorry for your father, his death. I'm like, yeah, right. I said, well, here's my card. If you ever want to explain to me why you did what you did to the American people, I'd love to hear from you. And of course, I never heard from them. But at least I got the chance to call him out on it. I'm not a Democrat. I didn't spit on him or kick him or anything like that. But he needed to hear from people that this is just unacceptable.
Well, I totally missed my normal timing that I would do a commercial break because this has just been too fascinating. But
sorry.
I do need to run a commercial break, and when we come back from that, I want to get into talking about your proposed legislation, like
Cool.
the pardon attorney reform and the Integrity Act. So let me run this commercial, and then we'll be back, and then we'll get into that discussion. So, all right,
Sounds good.
folks.
It says, I woke up this morning and looked out the door to a country I don't recognize. They put masks on our face to hide our pain, and there's no fire in most people's eyes. And it's still true today. It's still true today that they've tried to destroy the American spirit. And in some instances, they've done a dadgum good job. But in other instances, they have lit an inferno in some people. And we right now are gathering some of those people that are on freaking fire to save this country.
Welcome back, folks. And we have been really digging into some pretty deep stuff here with Joe Connor about what the Clintons did in regards to FALN terrorist members and granting clemency. Before we get back to our discussion, I just want to remind folks the commercial that you just saw is for a documentary called Finish This Fight, Diary of a Pissed Off American Soldier or American Veteran. And what this show is all about, and actually it's one of the few documentaries that I'm in. There are several whistleblowers that are in it. I would really encourage you to check it out. One of the great things about this show, and if you go to finishthisfight.us/Cain, you'll see it running along the bottom of the screen there. So it'll keep going in case you didn't get that written down. But if you go to this show, 50% of the proceeds for this are going to go to helping a veteran that has lost his ability to walk get into a exoskeleton. We're really using this documentary to try to raise that funds to help this young man, Joshua, to be able to walk again. and he's a great patriot and served this country with distinction and honor, and he can't walk, and so we want to help him. The other thing, though, too, is that the guy who made this possible, his name's Glenn Baker, wonderful man. I've gotten to know him really well, and he has allowed us to become an affiliate. So when you go and you check out this documentary at finishthisfight.us/Cain, our show will get a little bit of that as well. It's not a lot, but every little bit helps. And it certainly helps us to be able to continue to do this show and be able to bring great people like Joe Connor on. So I just want to ask you guys to please go and check that out. Now, right before we went to the break, I was getting ready to ask about this proposed legislation that you wanted to bring forward, the Pardon, Attorney Reform and Integrity Act. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what basically caused you to come up with this?
That actually was introduced some time ago, after the clemencies, and I introduced it. I think it was early 2000s, because of what the Clintons had done with the clemencies. We introduced the Pardon, Attorney Reform and Integrity Act, and it was designed to put guidelines on the president. So before he could issue a clemency or a pardon, there would be certain criteria that would have to be completed, like a background check and things of that effect, by the pardon attorney. It actually made it pretty far in the Congress until it was shot down on constitutional grounds. But it's an interesting point to raise right now, because there is more talk about introducing. I saw Andy McCarthy in National Review had just published a piece about, maybe it's time to do that. And I know Andy, so I sent him the note, and I'm like, here's that bill that we did, 20 years ago, and he didn't, I don't think people remember it, but it's been tried, and I don't think I still think it's probably the right idea. I do respect the Constitution. If we have to amend the Constitution, then there are ways of doing that. And but it was really designed, and I think he won it again now with the threats that Biden is having with giving clemency to preemptive clemency, and then the 1,500 clemencies that he offered today or yesterday.
And how about the pardon for the crimes of his son, past,
his
present,
son,
and
yeah.
future?
Yeah,
I mean, that's
I mean,
insane.
that's outrageous. It's outrageous that so like I said, my brother's comment was right. Alexander Hamilton never envisioned the 21st century or 20th 20th century presidents that we have. So I think we may see a little more movement on that, and so it's called the Pardon, Attorney Reform and Integrity Act. It's funny, if you look at the initials, it's Pariah, and I was like, wonder who that's named after.
Oh, that's great. That's very nice.
Who's the pariah there? All right.
So,
we do have a bill in front of in the Senate now about bringing the murderers home from Cuba. It's called the Frank Connor and Warner Forster Justice Act, and it was introduced by Marco Rubio. And while I was in D.C. this week, I met with his people. Now he's going on to the State Department. So Rick Scott's office had co-sponsored it, and it looks like they're going to pick it up. There's also a bill in the Senate called the Patterson-Forster Act, which is similar, not exactly the same. That Chris Smith, who headed the committee that was spoken yesterday, and you've probably seen him on the news talking about these drones. Great guy. I'm hoping that the combination of Rubio being an anti-communist, he's not anti-Cuba, he's anti-communist, in the State Department, Trump, and now we have
I think it's a brilliant move.
bills. We might have a chance. I do too. We might have a chance actually to get this bill forward, and there's been, if you're familiar with Cuba, it was long on the state sponsor of terror list, right? And they sponsor terrorists. They got terrorists living there, so obviously they sponsor them. But they were removed by Obama, in 2015, and then Obama went to Cuba in 2016 while I was at Gitmo, which was kind of weird. But anyway, so then in Trump put them back, put Cuba back on the terror list, and they've remained there under Biden. And there's talk now that looking at Biden to pull them from the list before he leaves, which would be a big mistake because they belong on it. But in a way, it might even be beneficial because it'll highlight it. People will start to see that, hey, what's going on here? And I think Trump will put them right back on the list, and maybe you might give us a better chance to negotiate. Look, get these guys back, get these terrorists back, and then we can talk about removing you from a sponsored terror list. But
Yeah.
who in
Well,
their
if
right
anybody
mind-
can get that deal done, it would be Donald Trump.
And you're right, and he's got to focus on it. There's a million things he's focusing on. So, I get it, but he's a law and order guy, and from what I know, he's aware of all this, and he likes to get good results, and this would be a good result.
Yeah. There's a lot of people, conservative MAGA supporters that were not happy with Trump's pick of Rubio.
Yeah.
I understood why he picked him, and it made sense to me. And I think that he'll do a good job. And there are a couple of things about him that I think are important for people to remember is that he is a avid anti-communist.
Yes.
And when you look at what the State Department's job is to do, and you look at what is going on around the world right now, I think the single greatest threat, to freedom around the world is communism. It is still communism. It has made it's changed slightly to this, quasi, it's become more fascistic. If you consider the fact that the government is in bed with corporations,
with the businesses,
yeah. But it's the same thing. I mean, it's all part of the same authoritarian rule, and it is very anti-liberty and anti-freedom. And the thing is that any kind of collectivism like that is dangerous. And so having somebody in the State Department that understands that and that has that in his in his genetics, basically his family history.
His family was from Cuba.
That's right. I think that's going to be a good thing, because I think we need somebody that's going to have those eyes on things around the world.
Yeah, I'm with you, and it's kind of funny that people are criticizing him more because the Democrats haven't. Like, that's been
Sure.
like, oh, he must not be good because the Democrats' heads aren't spinning around like Linda Blair because he became the nominee. Like, okay,
Yeah,
but that's not a reason. That's not a reason to oppose him.
Yeah, well, and funny thing is too, another thing about Rubio that I'll say that was kind of interesting was I remember a while back, one of the controversies when he ran for president against Trump that was used against him was the fact that he was pretty much poor. He didn't have a lot of wealth. He had mostly debt, because he had a mortgage on his home. And I'm thinking,
the rest of us.
And why is that a bad thing? It's like, so
I mean,
so it's
seriously.
Like, look at, you want him to be Nancy Pelosi,
Right.
using insider trading. So
or Joe Biden, you're 50 years making making an average of $75,000 in Congress,
right.
and you're like Elmer Fudd with mansions and yachts. I mean, this is freaking ridiculous.
Yeah, and I mean, but I'm glad Trump won, and I voted for Trump, but I do think I've been down to Miami a few times, and down to different events, and I actually went to a Trump rally that was put on by his sons, and Marco Rubio was there, and he was supporting Trump, and this was in the for the 2020 election prior to that.
Okay.
But he's been a strong supporter of Trump since then. So
He has.
So I don't have any issues with him, and I hope that he is successful, and I hope that he can help in maybe putting together a deal to get those terrorists back here so that they can be tried.
Well, and the most of them have been tried and convicted, which is beautiful. There's no trial necessary. Just go right to jail. Yeah.
Yep. Good.
Straight to jail.
Good. So I want to bring up something else too.
Sure.
Now you talked a little bit about it, but I'm really curious. Now you witnessed the 9/11 attacks,
Mhm.
and you lost your cousin Stephen Schlag.
Schlag, yeah.
How did that experience, experiencing yet another terrorist attack, influence your perspective on justice and national security?
Well, it was pretty stark difference after 9/11. Within like a month or so, we went to war to avenge that, and I contrasted that with at the time with the releases of the terrorists that killed Steve's godfather, right, my father.
Hmm.
So back then, I think I would have had a different kind of view, but now I'm starting to see that you know, the justice. We're not. Look, I went to Gitmo in 2016 and watched Khalid Sheikh Mohammed waving creepily at the family members and smiling and taunting us, and an absolutely disgusting display. And now, what are we gonna? They're going to make the deal with him. They want to shut down Gitmo and bring them to the U.S. and then what? Give him clemency because
Right.
he didn't fly the plane that hit the Trade Center. If he did, he'd be dead, right? So um, none of them did. So they're not murderers. They're fine. So I'm really disturbed about how justice hasn't been meted out properly now. I think the people at Guantanamo Bay are incredible. The prosecution, the other way I've looked at it too is these terrorists have sentenced the prosecution to life at Gitmo because of their endless um, changing of their lawyers, constant uh, appeals, and it goes on endlessly and endlessly, and the changes of judges, and the same guys more or less have been there prosecuting it for 20 years. So they've been sentenced to Guantanamo to life at Gitmo at this point, and I've kind of changed my thought that we're not justice has been slowed. I'm not a death penalty guy. I'm really not, but I am. I think if you're going to have it, these guys have to. It has to be them. How
Yeah.
could it not?
Yeah.
And
Mass
we
murderers is to me it is one of the, and those, people who, have committed true treason against the United States, or
right
tried to bring, overthrow this government. I think
without
that,
remorse,
yeah,
all those
yeah,
things.
absolutely.
Yeah. So if you're going to have it, they're the right people to have it. They already admitted back in like 2007 that they did it, and then Eric Holder threw that out, and now they're endlessly going on. So, it's made me hurt a little bit about American justice. I really feel pain for my cousin, my female cousins, Steve's sisters, who are just going through agony through this, especially Jean,
Hmm.
and it's it and Steve deserved a lot better too. He was he was a great guy. He was freaking funny, and had left 3 kids and a wife, and so much like my father in that way, with a wife from another country and little kids, and
Yeah.
he was just a great guy to be around. It's like it's hard to even believe it sometimes. And
See, when I look at 9/11, and I was working at the time, I was working at Fort Detrick in Maryland,
Maryland,
and so I saw, I was watching on television because I walked into the break room. That's one thing, right? Everybody knows where they were on 9/11.
yeah,
But I walked into the break room, and a bunch of people were standing around, and one of the towers was on fire, and somebody said, oh, I don't know, some plane, accidentally flew into the building, and then the second plane hit, and we were all watching it live, and I remember saying out loud, "This was no accident. This is terrorists." And
yeah,
then all of a sudden, we got the order that we had to evacuate the base, because where I was at, is where USAMRIID is, and where they have like a level 3 biocontainment
They have the
center.
bio thing, right?
Yeah, and
Because
they were
that was the
concerned.
anthrax they thought came from there.
That's right, and they were concerned that they didn't, because the other plane. Now we know it was headed towards the Capitol, but the other plane that ended up being taken down. But they didn't know where it was going to go. So then shortly
and they didn't
thereafter,
know if there were other planes either. I mean,
that's right.
We had no idea.
And the Pentagon, got hit, and I had friends that were lost there. And then I ended up working down there at DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency, right up the street from the Pentagon. I had to drive by it every day and see it being rebuilt. And but with all of the terror and all of the bad that came out of that, my concern about these types of events, is that, and I'm not one that necessarily, I've been really resistant to a lot of the conspiracy theories of, 9/11 being an inside job and all of that. But what I will say is this: I do think without any doubt that the powers that be, the shadow government, the deep state, whatever the hell you want to call them, the administrative state, and really the people who don't respect the Constitution, but they're all about power. They take these moments and these opportunities like 9/11 or like January 6th or other, events, and they use it to pump fear so that they can pass things like the Patriot Act, which has been routinely abused against the American people. And I was very concerned and cautious about the Patriot Act because I knew what it meant. Having worked in DOD and in the intelligence community, I knew this was not a good thing. I'm all for going after terrorists, and I'm all for even spying on terrorists outside of our country. But the problem is that I knew how easy it would be to abuse that system. And when I ended up going to work at the NSA, because I was hired by, I was a Marine civilian, and with Mar4 Cyber. And so I got read on to FISA and read on to all of the intelligence authorities. And I remember sitting down and I'm reading through all these, highly classified documents about our surveillance, systems, and they tell us what the, quote unquote, the checks and balances are that are there. And I'm just like, these seem pretty non-existent to me. The one thing that they said that was the only thing that seemed to me to have any kind of like weight of, giving somebody maybe pause before misusing these tools was the threat of prison, deprivation of rights under color of law, that if you used it on an American citizen, you were going to jail for 10 years. This is what they told us. Then we find out after January 6th in 2023 that there were 457,000 or 458,000 illegal uses of Section 702 of FISA against American citizens, mostly related to January 6th, but also a lot of them related to the George Floyd, riots and protests. So you're talking people on both sides of the aisle, people on the left and the right being targeted by the government illegally. And a judge, this is not Nate saying this, is a federal judge saying this, that they were illegal uses of Section 702. And yet not a single FBI agent went to jail for that.
No, yeah.
Not one. So when I see that, that's why I think, this cash has got to go in and clean house. And if there's willful misuse of tools like that, they got to go to jail, because unless they do, they're going to continue to use these kinds of things. And I don't believe that Congress has the will to remove the program, because they had the opportunity, with our new speaker, and in his first month on the job, he kicked the can down the road and gave the reauthorization of Section 702. And I've long felt like this tool is, I know what its capabilities are, and I think that these tools are being used to blackmail members of Congress. And that's my concern about it. So I think that while we've got to absolutely, we need to ensure that we've got justice happening, especially against terrorists and truly violent and despicable, human beings that are committing heinous acts. I also know that we have to be careful because there are people that will take advantage of our fear. They'll take advantage of these situations, and they'll create something that maybe at the moment seems like a great idea, but then down the road is going to get abused. It's kind of like clemency by
Well,
presidents.
seriously, I think what you're describing is I think our country was a bit naive, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of that has changed, at least for me. I think we've seen what has happened over the last 4 years, and certainly with all the crap that I've been through. The Pink Floyd, they said, "Mother, should I trust the government?" Right? No. But I
Yeah.
think we did trust the government, and I think for a long time most Americans thought the government kind of had our backs, and it wasn't that long ago. But I think there was a naivete there, and I don't know that we would allow that. I don't know. I would hope that we wouldn't allow that to happen again. But after 9/11, we didn't know when the next bomb. We thought dirty bombs were going to happen. Everyone was, maybe the fears were, enhanced for nefarious reasons internally. But I don't think any of us really thought like that. We were just trying to survive. Yeah, I look, I'm not arguing with you. I don't know enough about what happened at that time to make an intelligent
Yeah.
comment on it, but I hope that Americans would start seeing that our liberties clearly our liberties have been taken from us over the last several years,
Yeah.
whether it's through censorship or so many other things that have gone on.
Yeah, I was just kind of looking up here what the arguments for and against presidential pardons were during the Constitutional Convention, and there's some interesting, arguments. Most of which, of course, the arguments against were exactly what we're seeing today, right?
Oops.
Critics were concerned about the pardon power could be misused for personal or political gain. That's exactly what happened in that situation. With the the pardoning of the FALN members, that was 100% about political gain.
Yep.
And that a president might use pardons to shield individuals who help them commit treason or other crimes. That certainly, I think is something that I think we may find out with this president, depending on, if he ends up pardoning himself at the end here. But certainly him pardoning his son, I think, was to keep a lid on a lot of what went on
Absolutely
that has benefited him.
Yeah. His pardon to Hunter was him pardoning himself in a large degree. The only thing that could turn on him is now Hunter loses any immunity. He can't plead the fifth if he's brought in front of Congress. And I don't know that we have the will even to go that far. I hope we do. I hope this new Congress is tough enough. And there's a big difference between retribution and justice. And if in my case, say, I've just been seeking justice. I've said to people, I never wanted the terrorists to be in jail a minute more than they were sentenced. Right? That's fine. That was fine with me. That's justice. And I think, in the case of the new Justice Department, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, they just need to charge people if they broke crime, if they broke the law. Not retribution against anyone, but if you broke the law, then you should be charged. But it gets so twisted. It's kind of like a hockey fight. The first guy gets a shot in, nothing happens to him. When the guy retaliates, he's the one who goes to the penalty box. It's the Democrats do all this crap to start, and when the Republicans retaliate or fight back, oh, they pounced, or they're retaliating, or all these things. It's always the second. It's always the second one that gets you get hit for. For the shot back.
In your fight for justice, what's been the most challenging moment, and what has kept you going despite those challenges?
some of the most challenging moments is my family. Um, you know, I felt like I've had to neglect them on some level. I have, wife. My kids are grown now, but when they were little, and there's one. I swear to God, um, my son was born in '97, right?
Hmm.
Uh, so that he was like two, just over two, when all this crap was happening with the Clintons. And I was I was on TV. There was something that was recorded, or whatever, and he's like, "Dad, don't go on TV. They're going to hurt you." He was
Hmm.
two, and it kind of struck me like, all right, am I hurting my own family by doing this? Am I scaring my kid?
Hmm.
And I probably was.
Yeah.
And I there were times when I did this stuff when I should have been probably doing things more with the family, but there was a sense of justice, a sense of like my dad deserved better than this. And there was also a sense of I'm freaking pissed off. These guys are assholes, and what they did to us, they need to be called out on. So
Yeah.
there's been those kind of moments, and sometimes you're like, you're just tired. We have a movie, Shattered Lives, that we've been working on for several years. We produced it and we premiered it 2 years ago, and we just signed a contract with Newsmax to start having it shown. But that's another one too. It's really slow. It's a slow go. It's like, all right, it's almost 50 years now. You know, and James Rosen said to me, he's like, Joe, when is it enough? Like, when would your father be happy? I'm like, yeah, it's not about
Yeah.
that. I'm just trying to do what's right. And it wears on you, but we do get some victories, and I still, maybe I'm Don Quixote, but you know,
I know what you mean though about
if I'm not
your
fighting back, no
family.
one else is besides people like you.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I had. It's interesting you mentioned that because that's the same. If I were to ask myself the same question, I would come to the same conclusion that it's the things that my family has had to go through.
yeah,
I have 4 kids. I have a son who he was born in '96,
okay,
so right, almost same
same
age.
time, yeah,
And when I got poisoned twice, and we had the lug nuts loosen on a vehicle,
that's
my son was
unbelievable.
paranoid that I was going to get assassinated, and we went to one of when I was in the midst of all of the worst of it, and we didn't know if I was going to go to jail or if I was going to get charged, with something made up or whatever.
Right, right.
Um, Somebody offered us some free tickets to go to a Baltimore Orioles game. And if you ever been to the stadium there, it's like in the middle of town and it's got tall buildings all around it.
Oh, it's
So
a
you're
great
kind of walk.
spot. Yeah, I've
It
been there.
is. It's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it's
And
awesome.
as we're walking there, my son starts freaking out because all of these tall buildings, he's thought for sure there was going to be some sniper up there that was going to try
Oh
to
my
kill me.
God.
And it was at that moment I realized, wow, these kids really have been traumatized by all this.
Yeah.
Like me going out and talking, I did a lot of interviews, and I think in some ways that helped me to process all of that.
Yeah.
But my kids didn't. And
Right.
so my wife didn't. And they're now today, they're all going through therapy, for what happened, 5 years ago. I mean, they're all dealing with now the trauma of all of that, and basically having to relive it and talk about it, with a therapist, because they all have PTSD because of it. I was kind of surprised. I would have thought I would be the one with the PTSD, but I
Please,
think because I've talked about it so much, it kind of helped with that process of healing.
look, I hear you, and so then, like, what am I being selfish by trying? Like, am I being selfish by trying to bring justice for my dad? Is it at the expense of my family now? Like, it sucks, honestly, and um, but and then but then every once in a while, I'll talk to someone like you, or people be like, Joe, it's just good job, man. Like, these people deserve to get called out,
Yeah.
and so it kind of gives you a pep in your step sometimes. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's hard, and yeah, but the fact is, I'm not forced to do anything. It's my own choice, and my wife is, she she puts up with me. Um,
Thank God for good
I don't
as
know how
well.
she does it, but she does it.
Yeah.
My daughter too. My son actually is in Chicago. He's after college, he worked for Fox for a while, and then at a bond rating agency. And he decided to be a priest, so he's out there. So he's given me some religion, which is good.
Well, I'll tell you that on that note, that's something that has gotten me through a lot of it.
Yeah.
Man, I'll tell you, I've never, I would say I have been, I've been pretty religious, since I was 16. I mean, I had a pretty powerful conversion experience in high school that changed my life
Was
and
it like a
was very,
time event?
yeah, it was just a very supernatural experience that I had an encounter with God, and it changed my life. But even despite that, man, I'll tell you, going through what I went through with the whistleblowing, I've never prayed more in my life. And on my knees with my wife, I remember the night that I blew the whistle, and I came home, and I remember praying with my wife over and over again. And then the night we got raided, or the day we got raided, and then that night, I remember for days afterwards, I couldn't sleep. It felt like, I think I was in shock. Like, it felt like it was a dream, and then I'd wake
Well,
up
that
and realize, oh no, this is a nightmare, and I'm living it right now.
well, that sounds like PTSD,
Oh
honestly.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I had like almost like it it almost did not feel real. Like, I kept
Like
waking
an
up,
out of
and
body, out of
yes,
body experience. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And um, I remember all I could do, because I couldn't sleep, so I would wake up like every hour on the hour. I didn't know if her house was bugged, because they spent they spent 6 hours, um, no, sorry, 9 hours in my house
That's incredible.
while I was sitting on the couch, and they wouldn't let me move. And then they moved me to another room while they searched that room. So I didn't know if bugs were planted. I didn't know what was
Right.
going on. And I remember I couldn't sleep. I didn't feel like I could have a conversation with my wife privately in our bedroom. I would have to, we'd have to go for a walk and leave our phones, and just to have a private conversation. And but I remember waking up every hour on the hour, and all I could do was get on my knees and just pray and call out and cry out to God and ask God to please get us through this. And it strengthened me in ways I didn't know were possible. I will tell you that I am not afraid anymore. These people don't scare me. The cabal doesn't scare me. The dying doesn't scare me. I know when it's my time, it'll be my time. I know that they can try all they want, but they can't touch me unless God allows them to. It is, He knows every hair on my head, and that gets me through, I think, any
That's
fear
awesome.
at all. And there were miraculous things that occurred too, that showed me I was on the right path. And so, and sometimes it is just somebody coming to you and encouraging and telling you, you know what, thank you for doing what you've done. Because there are times you get weary, and
You do.
there's sacrifices without a doubt. You know, being anonymous and being, not being somebody who's out there in the public talking and all of that. I probably have missed out on a lot of financial opportunities because I run my mouth too much, on the internet. And
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed of it, and I never will be. But I know that puts some people off, probably some employers off, and because of it, I know there's
Oh, totally.
opportunities I've missed.
Totally.
But
Me too. Yeah.
but there's a couple of things, a couple of mantras, or sayings, if you will, that have stuck with me through it all. One of them is, I think it's usually attributed to Edmund Burke, which is that all that is required for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing.
To stay silent. Right?
Yeah, that is one saying that has stuck with me. And then there's another one that's out of the scripture, and I'm sure I'll probably, anybody watching, if you're, a Bible scholar, don't get after me for misquoting it slightly, but it's in James, and it says, "He that knows the good that he ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for him." And I really do believe that that is true. That what motivated me to blow the whistle and has motivated me to keep talking about this until the day we see justice, and I know that won't be until I'm up there standing before God.
Right.
But I don't want to stand before him someday and have him look at me and go, "Nate, I gave you all these opportunities to do the right thing and you didn't do it. You decided to be weak and afraid and hide in the shadows. You decided not to blow the whistle. You decided not to speak out about these injustices." And that motivates me to continue to speak.
I
And
hear you, man.
yeah,
We will say, like, the people I talk to, if not us, who, right? And
yeah, yeah.
that it's the same kind of thing, right? And God does come to you, like there's a lot of examples, but one of the clear ones is I was doing this interview with this woman, her name was Guerrera, from BBC Online, right? So I'm talking to her on my landline, and she's asking about my father, and she's asking, was I raised with hate? And I asked her, well, did you ask the terrorist if he was raised with hate? No, she asked me if I was raised with hate, because I try to keep the terrorists in prison. But she's asking me about my dad. And as she's talking to me, my cell phone rings, and it's a 212 number on it. I'm like, oh, all right. I don't recognize the number. The name didn't pop up because I didn't have it in my phone. So, all right, I don't know who that was. So I hang up eventually with her, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna figure out who this was who called me. So I Googled the number, and it comes out to the street in Washington Heights my father was brought up on his block. Someone was calling me from that block. I called the number back. It was a Spanish language answering machine. They never called me before. They never called me after. But I had a call from the street he grew up on while I was discussing him with this woman from BBC. And it told me, hey, I'm listening. I know, and kind of made me feel, all right, Dad.
Yeah.
I'm doing the right thing here. And it. It was.
There's something powerful about that when our loved ones have passed and we think about they're watching us, they're looking down on us. I really do believe that. And, the scriptures talk about it. It talks about that there's a great cloud of witnesses, and they're standing there, at the end of the race, and kind of looking down at us and cheering us on. And that's an interesting point you bring up, because it reminds me of another thing. There's one other thing that has really driven me, and it drives patriotism in me more than anything else. And that is the knowledge of all of my ancestors who fought for freedom, going all the way back to the beginning of this country. I've got an ancestor who was at the Battle of Cowpens and fought in the American Revolution.
Oh my God.
And I think about him, Michael Cain,
Wow.
taking a saber to the hand and to the face, having to take a horse cart 14 miles with a bunch of British redcoats in the cart with him to go get, to go 14 miles on a horse cart to a surgeon to be patched up. I think about my great grandfather, Memory Hollingsworth Cain, Colonel Cain. He was a prisoner of war in the Philippines, survived the Bataan Death March. And
the Japanese didn't take kindly to prisoners, did they?
No, he was beaten every single day, and to the point where he had permanent paralysis in part of his body because of it. But reading the stories about his soldiers, because he was the highest ranking officer in the camp.
What was that book? Was it Ghost Soldiers? About that? Was that?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
They escaped from the Japanese POW camp after the death march. I think it's called Ghost.
Well, you had the Great Raid.
Well, maybe that's what it was.
Yeah. So the Great Raid was interesting because the Great Raid, the way they set that up, and this was, not to go too far off the topic of tonight, but the way they set that up was they had intelligence. So the Filipino resistance was actually, they were working with, some of the soldiers that were in the prison camps, particularly, I found, and that just as I ended up stationed in Japan for 3 years, and while we were there, I started digging through archives, and because I was interested, and I'm like, oh hey, I can go check out these places and see, what was going on here and there, historically. Well, I found a declassified CIA dossier, and of course it was OSD back then, but
Right.
it says right on the, like, you can see it has a picture of the front cover, and it says CIA dossier, and it says top secret, and then that's
Wow.
crossed out, and it says declassified, and it has the date and all that. And when I look into it, and it has my great grandfather's name in there.
Oh my
And
God.
he was actually, as the highest ranking officer in Camp Bilibid, which was a prison in Manila. That was the final place that they moved him to. He was given the script by the Japanese guard to go out and buy rice to bring it back in for the prisoners. And when he was going out, he was sneaking out little pieces of paper that he would roll up and hide in his socks, that had the number of guards and where they were, and and
Oh my
when they changed
God.
their guard positions and all that, was giving that information to the Filipino resistance, who were basically working, as people selling the rice. He was
Right.
also, they had really bad dysentery, and a lot of guys were dying from illness like dysentery and cholera. And so he would sneak in medicine, and then he also would sneak in, he would tear off like little bits of scripture out of a Gideon Bible, would roll
Mhm.
them up and shove them into the cracks of the latrine, because it was the only place the Japanese would not go, was into the latrine, because it was so foul.
So it's full disgusting.
So the guys would go in there and they could read scripture while they're in there. And I found, but he was the one that was providing information out of Bilibid, and there was other
That's
guys
an
too that
amazing
were
story.
listed. But when I think about what these guys went through,
Yeah.
he was in a
I
prison
know.
camp for 3 years, and I think about what these guys went through. How could I not do, what I'm put on here on this earth to do? Like, if there's something opportunity for me to do good, for me to
Yeah.
turn that down out of fear, I just think
It
about
would
how
be
ashamed
it
they
would
would
be
be of me.
it would be a disservice to him and for everything that he did
Absolutely.
and he died for.
And and
I
and his son, my grandfather, he was in the Navy, and he ended up on the ship that was there during the Great Raid. They made sure that he was there to liberate his father.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like,
So he was still
it's
he was fighting age. So your great grandfather was fairly old then, right? For a
yeah,
soldier.
he was in World War One and World War Two. So
World War II.
In World War One
Wow.
was even crazier story. I mean, that we don't have time for it, but I'll just say he was shot down. He was a pilot in World War One, so he's in a biplane. He was a, what do you call it, the navigator. So he's sitting in the
Yeah, he
back
sat
seat.
in the back of yeah.
The plane crashes, and in an apple orchard. And I was told, that my grandfather, he was hiding out in this apple orchard for like 2 weeks, never ate another apple again in his life.
I was gonna say at least he has something to eat, but
But he ends up captured by gets captured by the Germans, and he was a he had to hand over all of his effects when he went into the prison. And
right.
I guess, so one of the guards comes into his cell at night, puts a bag over his head, brings him out of the cell, puts him in a car. They drive, off into the, woods somewhere, for a long time. And all this time he's thinking he's going to be executed.
He's
And
gonna be
he's
shot. Yeah.
taken out of the car, walked out into the woods, and this German guard fires off 2 shots into the air, then pulls the bag off of his face and shows him his Masonic ring. And my grandfather was a Freemason. So
He
he
was a
basically,
Freemason.
he points him to the Polish border and lets him go
Go.
free.
Oh my God.
That's crazy.
What a
So,
great story.
these stories are they're there.
Yeah.
The stories
Well, you gotta
about,
write it. You gotta have you written this stuff? You gotta write it
I
down. Like
need to, I really do.
you
But,
do. Yeah.
knowing that the history of your family line, knowing about the memories of your father, I know that those things, they drive us, because we know they're up there looking down on us.
Yeah, I mean, we wrote the book Shattered Lives to memorialize it. And actually, I wrote another book I would love to send you. It's called The New Founders, where we brought the American founders to life in 21st century America. We used the Constitution, the Declaration, the Federalist Papers, and others to
Oh, I'd love to
run
read it.
George Washington in today's world. It was written during the Obama time. But what we realized, my friend Mike Duncan and I wrote it. We realized that the only way to keep us to get back to where we need to be is the Constitution and
Absolutely.
religion. The founders knew that without piety, this country wouldn't work. And
That's right.
that's a theme throughout the book. We make it funny, we make it kind of interesting, and we have a website, thenewfounders.net. There's a bunch of chapters on it. If the audience wants to take a look at them, they're up there. And it's called The New Founders. They also have We Win America is my website with most of the stuff on it. Some Fox appearances and whatever. There's a lot of stuff on it that I've done over the years.
Thenewfounders.net.
Thenewfounders.net is for the book.
Okay.
Yeah. And
all right. And then what was the other site?
WeWinAmerica.com has
Okay.
most of like the stuff that we've done over the years. And then
Great.
the movie, ShatteredLivesMovie.com. We have the documentary based on the book Shattered Lives that Jeff Ingber and I wrote. So, but it was all, the Shattered Lives was for my dad, but the New Founders was like the patriotism, at some point I was like, I remember when I had the idea, I was driving back from DC and it was beautiful. I was going through like the Potomac and I had GPS on. And I'm like, well, Washington, he was a surveyor. He would have thought GPS was pretty cool. And what would he think about driving through the state of Virginia right now? Well, it's still pretty good. And I'm like, well, what if he came back? And so I talked to my friend Mike Duncan, and we started crafting this idea. Let's bring them back to life, and we'll show what they thought and what they would do in situations without hammering people over the head with a textbook. We'll just bring them alive, and they'll say it and they'll do it. And so, it's pretty fun. Yeah, I think your audience would probably like it. They should take a look.
It's interesting. Even though I'm sure the founders would look at today and they would find a lot of things very upsetting in America, there really is nothing new under the sun.
It's the same.
It is. I remember reading about the reason that the colonists, or the reason that the pilgrims came to America. A lot of people don't know that history, but the reason they came here because they were living in Holland, but their kids, they were falling under, they were becoming immoral because of the society around them, and they were seeing their children, basically fall into alcoholism and
Right.
drugs and other things, and they decided to, we need to leave and go somewhere where we can raise our kids, and and they'll turn out okay. And that had that the Puritans, that's what they were all about. And and we see that today in America. We see people concerned about the same things.
Absolutely.
The founders,
stuff has changed. The founders knew everything.
No, they were afraid. They saw ultimate collectivism in pure democracy, right?
They didn't go for pure democracy. That's what drives me crazy.
No, that's why I hate it when they use
democracy.
That term.
It's not a democracy. It's a constitutional
they
republic.
saw. That's right. They saw France devolve into just mass killings and
right.
It was the tyranny of the majority. What was it? Exactly. Somebody, who was it that said democracy is pure democracy is they said it's two wolves and a sheep arguing over what's for dinner.
Yeah, I've heard that expression before. I can't remember who said it, but
was that John Locke, or I can't remember who said that, but it was that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, no, I've heard that too. That's cool. But yeah, I mean, we learned that in like writing the book. Like, holy crap! Like everything that even they're talking about chain migration, and the founders talked about that. And that's in the book. And the idea of anchor babies didn't start until the 20th century. That wasn't part of their idea.
That's right.
The
They were
debt.
concerned. They were concerned about monopolies. They were concerned
Absolutely.
about, they wanted capitalism, but they saw that there was a problem in that efficiency would eventually drive things to capitalism. So they created antitrust laws. And yet, look at what's going on today. All the problems that we have with the corporations and big media and all that. It's because there's no competition.
There's no
They
competition.
buy up the competition.
They've almost, there was a time, but not that long ago, where government would, no, you can't. That a merger, they would reject mergers. They don't do that much anymore. I think I just saw
No,
something
it stopped
recently
with Bill
very
Gates.
rarely. It's very
Yeah.
rare.
Microsoft.
Very rare.
Microsoft was the last big case that I remember being brought, and then all of a sudden it went away. And I don't really know why.
Yeah.
But after that, you saw a departure, from the way that they used to. Remember AT&T and the
When
baby
they broke
bells
up
and all
AT&T,
that.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, man, this has been a fascinating discussion, and I hope that
Yes.
we'll continue to talk, and
I
I'd love
love
to
it.
have you on again and talk about some of these other issues, especially as they come up with these pardons and stuff.
Yeah, well,
Um,
that's going to come up again, and then so
yeah,
this stuff never ends. It's just it just never seems to. Every time I feel like I'm out, they drag me back in.
yes, I hear you. I hear you. I've tried to get out of I've worked on election integrity, and I hate working on election integrity because every time I do, you're just a target for everybody, and not to mention, generally you get stiffed. If you do the work, you're likely not going to get paid. That's happened to me more than once.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
it sucks. But
Yeah,
if somebody asks for my help, I can't just, I
you
can't
can't
turn
say
them
no,
down.
right?
So yeah,
I'm with
so
you, man.
I understand getting dragged into these things. But well, anyways, I always end my show. I always ask the question, and I want to ask you.
Sure.
We've talked about a lot tonight, but what is, if people walk away from this conversation and they only remember one thing, because people have short attention spans, what is it you want people to take away from our conversation tonight?
I don't think it's one specific point of what we talked about, but I think it's the idea that we never forget, but that's not enough. You always have to be prepared to act, and you have to act. Never forgetting is great, but there's action that has to be done, and you have to live your life preparing for that action because you don't know when you're going to be called. And be aware, have your goals, have your integrity, and when the time is called for you to do something, and everyone has it. Like for me, and I think, and for you, it's very clear what my goal, but everyone has something in their lives. Everyone I talk to, like, holy shit, that happened to you. Like everyone has something that they can take action on to make their life better and people around their lives better. And do it.
You know what that reminds me of? When I was in college, I had a cybersecurity ethics course, and I remember they brought up something that was very interesting. They were going through a lot of the wise sayings of the ancient wise people, and they did a comparison of the golden mean, which everybody knew at the time because it was I think it was Aristotle or Plato. I can't remember which one, but they did a comparison of the golden mean, and then they gave a comparison of the golden rule, which Jesus, gave.
Right.
And they sound similar, but they're different. The golden mean is don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you. But the golden rule is do unto others what you want done unto you. And that is the difference. That is the call that God has on all of us, which is that it's not enough to just say, I remember. It's not enough to just not do evil. No, we must do good. And that's really what it boils down to.
Take action for what's right. And if everyone does a little bit, and look, I'm not preaching because I'm not the best guy in the world. Whatever. But sometimes when you're called, you got to freaking step up.
Yeah. Well, with that,
for a while. Hey,
yeah,
this was great, man. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you. And I want to go ahead and just close this in prayer. We are fighting the good fight, and we have to do our part, but we need God's help, especially for all those things that are out of our control. Heavenly Father, Lord, I just thank you so much, Lord, for Joe and for this conversation tonight. Lord, I pray that those that have listened to it, that they will be blessed, that they will gain something from this conversation, Lord, that they will take with them for the rest of their lives. And Lord, I pray it will encourage and motivate people to get out and do good, to find what it is that they can do to contribute to society and to contribute to community. And Lord, they will do it. Lord, I pray that you would help people to have courage and have faith and have the strength and endurance needed. And Lord, I pray for Joe, and I pray for myself, Lord, and our families. Lord, for our families that have gone through quite a bit, I pray, God, that you'd bring healing. And Lord, for those of us that are in this fight still to this day, I pray that you would give us the endurance to continue that fight and help us to be effective. And Lord, I just thank you for tonight. Pray that you bless all those that are listening tonight, and that you would just be with us and into the weekend. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, folks, I want to remind you to check out the raisingcainshow.com. This show, along with all of my other shows, I do some talk radio as well. You can find on the raisingcainshow.com. And I also do a Substack, which you can also find there. But you can find my Substack at mcpoda.substack.com. That, by the way, for those of you that don't know, MC Poda was the name, the code name that I was given when I was a whistleblower. And my Cuban immigrant lawyer gave me that name, and I was like, you couldn't pick something cooler than that. And he goes, oh no, you'll like it. And I go, what does it mean? He says, making communists pay out the ass. So I was like, I love this name. so that is Hammer. Yes. So that's my Substack, and I just put out an article on the situation in Syria. I did a detailed analysis of the diplomatic efforts I think that need to happen there, that could actually help to stabilize the Middle East if the United States makes the right moves. And so I went through and talked a lot about that, and talked about the different rebel groups that have taken over Syria. It's an interesting article if you're into national security or geopolitics. But I do post a lot of things in there, and so I hope you'll go and check it out. Lastly, I want to remind folks to please do check out finishthisfight.us/Cain. I didn't run my other commercials tonight because it was just too much interesting, of a story tonight that we were talking about. And so I totally forgot. But we have some other sponsors. If you go to theraisingcainshow.com and you go and check out, there's a sponsors link there that you can go and see, who supports our show. And I would encourage you to go and check those products out. Anyways, God bless you guys. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and have a wonderful night. And Joe, if you don't mind, hang on after the show, because I'd love to, share contact information with you and maybe get something on the schedule.
And Merry Christmas to your
absolutely
Merry Happy Christmas. Hanukkah. And
Yep. Thank you. All right.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, the time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.